Hey everybody, in today's video I'm going to be talking about 4 books that I've recently been reading. 2 of these books I have finished and 2 of them I'm still currently working on. But I just wanted to make a quick little video to show you what I've been reading recently. So the first book is a really interesting book called Battle for the Mind, A Physiology of Conversion and Brainwashing. This is written by a physiologist named William Sargent. And this is the hardest book I've read this year so far. It was very technical because it's kind of like an academic work. But essentially, this is a really interesting book because it's all about the physiology and psychology of brainwashing a person. How do you get someone to believe something that you want them to believe? How do you get someone to believe something that is the opposite of what they already believe? And people have tried to brainwash people for arguably all throughout history. So this book actually gets to the actual science of how you go about converting a person to a completely different way of thinking or brainwashing them into a specific worldview or a specific way of seeing things. So this book argues that effective brainwashing originates in the nervous system, right? We all have a nervous system, right? Our central nervous system is our brain and our spinal cord. And this book argues that effective brainwashing originates in how you are able to stimulate a person's nervous system. And according to this book, there is a certain point in which you can stimulate a person's nervous system beyond a certain point where they can actually handle it, right? Once you are able to stimulate a person's nervous system beyond a point where they can no longer handle it through some kind of trauma or some kind of extreme experience, then this person undergoes what's called transmarginal inhibition. And that's just a big fancy scientific word to describe this point where this person's nervous system breaks down and they have to go into some type of, for lack of a better wording, coping mechanism. So this book argues that the most effective brainwashing is through getting a person to go through this transmarginal inhibition. And you can trigger this kind of nervous system breakdown through extreme experiences of inducing a person to be very afraid, very angry, essentially some kind of emotional disturbance that gets this person to break down. So once you get a person to have this type of emotional breakdown, this book argues, then you are able to implant your ideas into their minds, because once this person has this emotional breakdown, they are more likely to show impaired judgment and heightened suggestibility, meaning that they are more open-minded to what you are going to say. They are more likely to take on your ideas. They are more likely to believe the kinds of things that you put into their mind. And there are clear examples that this book goes into. This book talks about how throughout history there have been people who they've tried to convert people to their religions. And so they've given like sermons that paint these very, very vivid pictures of like of what a person is going to go through if they don't accept this religion. And that gets a person to have like a deep emotional breakdown, and then they are more susceptible to being converted over into this person's religion. And they have other examples where, in a political context, if you want someone to actually get brainwashed into believing what you believe, if you can put them in a situation where they are physiologically and emotionally broken down, it's more easy to implant your way of thinking, implant your thoughts into their head, and bring them into believing what you believe politically. And a book like this is so interesting because we hear examples and cases of people being brainwashed or going through some kind of, having their entire worldview changed through some kind of, malicious intention. And this book is going to give you a really interesting view into the actual science, the actual physiology and psychology of how you get a person to believe something over here and get them to have an entirely different opinion by the end of the brainwashing experience. Now, granted, this book is a little old, so it would be interesting to see how some of the more recent physiological and psychological science goes into how you can actually brainwash a person. Obviously, brainwashing people is wrong. Don't read a book like this and then go out and try to like brainwash people and convert them into your way of thinking through like these messed up tactics. But it's just really interesting to see how this works. And this book is going to give you that deep dive into the technical steps that a person can take to actually get brainwashed, and then how you can also be less susceptible to brainwashing by knowing what to look out for and understanding how it works. So the next book actually piggybacks a little bit off of what I've just described in terms of like mass brainwashing and getting a person to believe something. This book is called Hitler's Charisma: Leading Millions into the Abyss by Lawrence Rees. I got this book from the library, like the last book I just showed you. They both came from the library. And the idea is, we've just talked a little bit about brainwashing people, right? How do you get someone to believe something? And essentially the main question of this book is, how did someone like Hitler get lots of people to buy into his worldview? How was he able to convince so many different people to follow him, to believe in his vision of the world, despite it being an awful vision of what the world would be? And in line with this book, Battle for the Mind, where it talks about brainwashing people, Hitler didn't use those exact same methods necessarily, as far as what I can see, but Hitler used his own methods to brainwash people. One method is this notion of the Hitler myth, right? Hitler and some of his people that worked for him in terms of like his propagandists that he had, like Joseph Goebbels, they constructed this myth and this idea of Hitler that he was infallible, that he was doing everything he was doing because he was called by Providence to do it, right? This notion that he was called, there was like a kind of historical force that was moving Hitler, almost a spiritual force that was moving Hitler in the direction to do the things he was doing and to bring the German people into a new age where they wouldn't have to worry about the things that they were worrying about. Because a big part of why Hitler was successful in seducing a large part of the German population was because Germany was going through so many terrible things after World War I. Their economy was in shambles, unemployment was very high, the reparations and the things that they had to pay to all of these different countries after World War I, it was just destroying them. And so here comes this guy who is giving you this promise that not only he can restore Germany, but also painting this conspiracy theory of our problems are because of Jewish people. Jewish people stabbed us in the back. It's called the stab in the back theory, as to why, a lot of Germans believe that Jewish people in their society had stabbed them in the back, and that's why they lost World War I. And this book shows you how that's not true at all, right? Jewish people around the time of this book, they only comprise like 1% of the German population. So they couldn't obviously have been the reason why Germany lost World War I. There were many other reasons why Germany lost World War I besides Jewish people stabbing them in the back. So there was this myth of Hitler that they painted in the Nazi regime of, this is the man who's going to save us and he has been called by Providence to do this. So piggybacking on some of these ideas of brainwashing that I just talked about, when a population is going through all of the negative things that they're going through, you can imagine that this is a very powerful emotional experience. You could even say to some people an emotional breakdown where they don't know what they're going to do, they're helpless, and then the Nazi regime through their propaganda comes in and is able to indoctrinate them into believing in their worldview. Another thing about Hitler that made him very successful is that he was a very good speaker. He could create an emotional connection with the crowd and get them outraged and get them really pissed off and get them to believe that he had the answers because his public speaking skills were very good and he could draw the crowd's attention and he could get the crowd riled up. He had that charisma. Some people would actually buy into Hitler's charisma, this book says, and other people wouldn't. So the extent to which a person is susceptible to a person's charisma plays a role into how quickly they're going to buy into what a charismatic leader is saying. And that actually is consistent with what this book talks about, because this book talks about that there are some people, in terms of their temperament, who are more likely to be brainwashed than others. I actually might make another video in the future talking a bit more about this book and then how it applies to other situations like Nazi Germany and getting into like more of the details and other situations in society where this can be used for certain intentions. So the next two books I have are fiction. The first book is a classic called The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This is a dystopian novel about a society where there's been this type of revolution, and now women in the society are basically used for like their childbirthing abilities. And women are seen predominantly, overwhelmingly, through the lens that they can make babies. You are essentially like this baby incubator, and that is kind of like your role in society, just to have kids, and that is where all of your worth lies. And if you can't have kids, it's like this shameful thing that even the women themselves have come to believe they should be deeply ashamed with themselves that they can't have kids. People in the society have had their freedoms restricted, because in this society it's gone back to a very, I guess you could say, restricted way of viewing things, like you can't do this and you can't do that, you're not allowed to do this and that, and a lot of the things that we have in our modern culture have been done away with. And because of this, a lot of people don't have much freedom anymore, but it especially applies to women because they are very restricted in what they can and what they can't do. And as the book talks about, some women are what are called handmaids, and handmaids are women who are used entirely based upon the idea that they can give birth to kids for certain men called the commanders. Offred is the main character in this book, and she is a handmaid, and you kind of just go through her journey, or not journey, but her situation of being a handmaid and the kind of psychological impact it has on her to essentially just be a handmaid and be used for giving birth to kids. She's not allowed to have her own life. She's not allowed to really read or think critically for herself. She's basically just told to be silent and just be a handmaid and just give birth to kids. And things are so strict in this sense that if you don't really follow these rules, you would either be ostracized from the society that you're in, which is very dangerous, or you would be killed, right? In some kind of like public way to show what happens to people who don't really follow the modern way of thinking in this novel. So this is a really good novel that explores, what a woman would go through if she was only viewed in terms of her baby making abilities rather than being viewed as a complete person. So I definitely recommend this book. It was a great read, so if you're interested, be sure to pick it up. And then the last book for this video is a book by one of my favorite authors, Fyodor Dostoevsky, called The Idiot. Supposedly, the idea behind this book is that Dostoevsky wanted to explore what a person would be like if they were the perfect person, right? Not necessarily perfect, but as close to being like a Christ-like figure as possible, right? And so Dostoevsky creates this character called Mishkin, and in this book, Mishkin is a very kind, very open-minded, very considerate person who is going throughout a society where so many different people are only interested in themselves and interested in what benefits them. And you see a sharp contrast between Mishkin and the other people in this story that he interacts with. And so many people in this book, they interact with Mishkin in a way where they say, wow, Prince, no one is like you. No one is like you. You are in a different category of people altogether because of his kindness and how he is willing to see people and believe in them even when they don't believe in themselves. And there's something about that that makes Mishkin very attractive to all of the people in this novel. They all, or I can't say they all, but most of them want to befriend him. Most of them want him in their lives. He's also considered as simple-minded because he is perceived as being so innocent. He's perceived as being so, good, that a lot of people think that he is so innocent that they might contaminate him or that they might be able to take advantage of him. There's one woman in this book that he falls in love with, and granted I haven't finished this book so I can't explain what happens in the end yet, but there's a woman in this book that he falls in love with, and she technically loves him too, but she genuinely believes that he is so innocent and that she is so flawed from her past and what she's done, that if she were to fall in love with him and be with him, that she would end up contaminating him and ruining him and disgracing him in some way from the lofty position that everybody sees him from. So as usual, this is one of my favorite authors, Dostoevsky, because he's very good at looking into the psychology of his characters and creating characters that have a lot of psychological depth. And so you definitely see that in this book. There are a lot of characters. As with a lot of Russian novels, there are so many different big names to learn that sometimes you might have a hard time being like, oh wait, who is this character again? Where did they come from? But overall, so far I would definitely recommend this novel, especially if you like Dostoevsky. I wouldn't put it up there with some of his other novels like Crime and Punishment, but it's still a good read and still a book that I've really enjoyed. Anyway, those are the books that I have been recently reading, and I hope you enjoyed hearing a bit about them. I would definitely recommend any of these books to people who are looking for something to read, and I might make some more videos in the future going a bit more in-depth into some of these books, rather than just giving you the review I've given you today. Anyway, that's it for today's video. So if you have not already subscribed to this channel, make sure that you subscribe so you get a lot of updates. If you liked this video or if you liked any of the books I've talked about, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. And also leave a comment. Did you like some of these books if you've read them? Did you dislike these books? Let me know what your thoughts were. I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.